before this video dropped today, there wasn't the clarity around, is this conventional appraisals that they're guaranteeing in 24 hours, or what is it specifically that's being offered?
Trump has been begging and threatening any and all that he can to try and get rates to lower sooner than they have now.
At the time of the internet or mobile technology was evolving, I think people underestimated what it can do, and others overestimated or envisioned it doing something different than it ended up doing. I think artificial intelligence will end up playing out the same way.
Google DeepMind and Yale, 27 billion parameters or something entered in, and AI system suggested a hypothesis to make a certain type of cancer visible to the immune system. Episode 61 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, we took a week off unintentionally, but we did, and we're back. Welcome.
Good to be back, Mark. It always is. I miss the week, when we don't get together and just kind of force ourselves to be paying attention to what's going on, studying, researching, just conversing. I really do enjoy the opportunities, but sometimes life happens, and so here we are making up for a missed week, but it's always good to be back together with you.
You bet. We were, before we got on the show, we were reviewing a successful podcaster's account of his trek, which is a more than a decade trek. And I now forget there was like a name of the level of persistence that you'd have to have. You probably remember it. But it's just like, hey, if you love it enough to do it for 10 years with really no feedback, then maybe you've got the persistence necessary to stick with it. So, I think when we miss a week, that at least tells me that I enjoy doing it, or I find a lot of benefit, because I agree with you. I don't know if I'd say I feel dumber, but maybe I feel dumber not doing it. So glad that I don't feel as dumb this week.
Well, I'm just glad to hear that doing it doesn't make you dumber, because I'm sucking the intelligence out of the room or something. Mark, it's been funny. I for the longest time, people had just told me, "Hey, are you that guy on the radio? Like, you sound like you have a radio voice." And I'd always tell them, they tell me that while I was walking through their house, taking pictures, doing the appraisal. And I'd always tell them, well, I haven't found a way to make any money, with whatever this voice is, or trying to be on the radio. And so I've ensured that is the case by starting a podcast that doesn't make any money, but at least I'm leveraging whatever the voice might be. So I'll note that I am coming to you from a remote location. We're in the same state, although it would be hard to find a state where you could have more distance from each other and still be in the same state than Texas. So I'm not even sure how good the audio quality is today, but we're rolling with it one way or the other.
Yeah, we hear you well, and glad you're out there serving the industry through volunteerism yet again. Another thing you're doing that's not making any money, Jeff. I'm beginning to question your choices.
I ought to write, maybe collectively we could write a book on things to do to not make money. I don't know if there'd be a market for it. That would be another one of those things that wouldn't make any money, writing the book. But so I'm at the Appraisal Foundation meetings. We've talked in a prior episode, I think, where I'll be joining the board of trustees. But I've talked to several people here. In fact, one that was a county assessor out in Florida, Pinellas County, for any Florida buffs. But it was really interesting. He was talking about a fraction that they had between two different associations of assessing appraisers there, and just the extra work and headache that it caused. In some rare cases, they'd have one association opposing legislation that the other association was supporting, and they finally were able, after 30 years, to bring those things together. And he's just talking about how much better it's been for all of the members of that association, and he talked about bearing a lot of the brunt of the extra work that came on because of these kind of warring factions that existed out there. And it's just, but he was saying, a lot of people were saying, hey, well, everything seems to be going fine. Why do we need to merge these two organizations together? And he said, well, it's only going fine because we're barely holding things together, trying to, walk a tightrope between both of those. And so it just was a really interesting illustration to how much work can go on in the background that most people don't see and aren't aware of. That if there aren't those volunteers kind of doing the unsung work, things just really don't happen. And yet, we just take for granted that things work the way they do, and not seeing kind of behind the scenes what it takes to make things happen. There's no shortage of criticism and reasons that people are unhappy about the way that things exist today. But all the same, I could really feel for him in, kind of that weight that he had been carrying for a long time. And you could just see the relief that he had if we finally, after a 30-year division, got these two associations back on the same page and like physically or literally merged back together. So yeah, it was a really interesting microcosm of a lot of the service that takes place in the background that a lot of us just don't even know is happening.
Well, we've talked a lot about it here. I'm happy to have you and the others that I know on the board of trustees and in and around the Appraisal Foundation. There's such an unusual and unique appetite to consider like vast change in trying to keep up with the changing world around us. And I don't know this to be the case, but I just can't imagine that the appetite for change was anywhere near what it is today, some 15, 20 years ago. I think things were fine the way they were, and to suggest anything different would be blasphemy on some level. Don't know that from experience, but just from observation from very far. Now a little bit closer look, boy, there's a lot of change being considered. So, and really a lot of change implemented. We started this podcast with PREA, which is covering PREA, which is an enormous change in how someone can get experience. But there's a lot more being considered, and good to have sound minds, making decisions and pulling in data to help make decisions.
That's exactly right. I just sat through, they go through a very extensive interview process for anybody that gets added to the standards board, the qualifications board, or the board of trustees. And I just listened to an interview by a friend of the pod, Sean Telford. And, one of the things he was talking about in some of the questions that were asked is the role that technology and artificial intelligence is playing today, but that is going to play going forward. And it's just really important to be forward looking and trying to make the best decisions for the profession and for all of those that rely on appraisal services, knowing that this technology is emerging and evolving, and none of us knows exactly what it's going to look like. But the worst thing in the world we could do is just hope that it doesn't impact us very much, or not be proactively engaged in trying to understand what role should it play, how should this intersection of technology and human judgment really play out. And nobody knows for sure, but putting thought and resources and effort into defining that well. Everybody that I talk to wants to see a robust appraisal profession well into the future. I think that's in the best interest of the public at large, but it takes a lot of intention to understand how can we help guide that ship in a way that the technology is helpful and not detrimental to the profession and people's perception of what it is appraisers do.
You bet. Well, and I think this technological shift we'll talk about a little later on in the program today. And there's some interesting developments, I think, is that's coming around, and sort of whole solutions that maybe head towards this AGI or artificial general intelligence, and create some frameworks around how that could take place. Where to date, I've been looking at I just don't really see how we get from next word guessing to artificial general intelligence. So we'll get there. We've got a few other things to discuss. Jeff, I was just kind of on a personal note. There was a couple of reasons we weren't able to record last week, but one of them, very sadly, was my mother's passing, and I had just wanted to note it here. It's been a tough couple of weeks. She had pancreatic cancer for 2 years, and a few that listened to this podcast at least knew my dad well and knew my mom through my dad through the internet. And Elsie was an awesome lady. I think one of the things that I've thought about over the last little bit is how different she was from me in certain aspects. I'm always trying to impact the world on a like some grand scale to me, whatever that is. Like this podcast is like an example of it, Jeff. It's like talking to people, not just that I'll see, walking down the street in my neighborhood, but the internet, and being able to reach someone from the other side of the world. And like these sort of grand things, but a lot of times, making an impact or attempting to make an impact where I don't live and work. And my mom was the exact opposite. And I'm sure a lot of mothers are this, where her entire world and intent to impact was right in her community, her family, those on her street, those, the children that she's around. And I did a great job. I think it inspires me to look a little closer by than I have. And I don't know, maybe wanted to share that observation because I get a little wrapped up in the grandiose, and there's a lot in community and family that can be overlooked if you get too focused there. So a sad week for all of us, but really kind of a beautiful end in a way of ending of life that I haven't been part of. We had both of her sons, me and my brother, and 7 grandkids around for the last 3 weeks every day through it. And it was a process I was a little nervous about, really, because we knew it was going to approach. And there was some beauty in it that it was not expected. So there we are. Tough, sort of life-changing week for me.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Mark. I mean, I know I told you this privately, but you guys have been in my thoughts and prayers. It's just such a tender and kind of emotion-packed, time where, especially when you know that just with the health that's where things are heading. But it really does cause you to reflect on the impact that those individuals had. And what a beautiful tribute, for your mother. So I appreciate you sharing that. I was sitting through a session today and somebody asked the winner of an award, well, so what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be remembered for? And ultimately the answer came down to, well, I guess I want to be remembered for having made an impact in people's lives. And that can be at the one-on-one individual level. That can be on a larger scale level. I've been thinking about a lot of things, this week as well, in part just kind of observing what you've gone through from afar. But my wife and I had an opportunity to go on a trip, and we saw some historic sites. One of them was the National Monument for the Women's Rights Movement, which we just kind of showed up at, and I was like, that's great. Let's check it out. But it was really interesting to read and just think through some of the experiences people had in the past, that those that were willing to make a stand made a difference, not just in their families' lives, but on a large national scale too. And so, I mean, I respect and honor those that make that impact on their children's lives on an individual basis, and those that pursue, change on a much broader basis. I think there's room to do both, but it's challenging, as I think you've well stated there.
Well, Jeff, I'm certainly glad you didn't announce your family vacation to New England. No doubt you would have had Market Moose fans chasing you down at every stop. So you avoided the fanfare there, and were able to keep the privacy.
Yeah, I really worry about that. Being stopped in the street, by somebody who recognizes the podcast. The only place I'm ever stopped is at an appraisal conference where somebody who's no more interesting than us, might not have anything better to do than listen. Although I will tell you, I did have now we're not gonna have any listeners now that I've just offended and alienated the couple that we had, to start with. But I was able to have dinner with Tim Anderson, who we've mentioned before, such a gracious individual, very knowledgeable, has helped a lot of appraisers along the way. I think he's one that will be remembered as someone who just has gone out of their way to help people, and such a gracious guy. But it was really just enjoyable conversation to be able to sit down in person with him for a little bit. So I hope we've retained at least one fan, even if he's the sole survivor when this thing's all said and done, Mark.
Well, the best kind of fans are when you're a fan of them as well, and I think that about counts for most of our viewership. So good stuff there. Well, diving into one of the first topics, or one of the topics today, the first topic is a release on the appraisal side. So like breaking appraisal news, if there is such a thing. We've been kind of following it a little bit through LinkedIn, and that is there are reasons that we're following it because it's kind of close to our hearts at Acurity where we work. But Brian Zitten and Reggora have been talking a lot about a 24-hour appraisal turn time product over the last little bit. And, I was eyebrows raised and interested to see what they all had to say and what the plan is with that. And they released a short video today, and I think maybe went live with the product. But interesting, as best I can understand it. Hope to have Brian on maybe to talk about it. I know it's a lightning rod topic. Fully understand that with those that are listening. But my understanding is that largely a conventional appraisal product that maybe works out the property condition report, this new inspection allowance in hybrids from Fannie and Freddie, to be done kind of earlier than everybody is traditionally ready to order those sorts of things, in no cost to the borrower. So maybe there is some cost being absorbed, either Reggora or someone else in the process. I'm not entirely sure, but overcoming the obstacles that require that thing to be ordered so late in the process, so that they receive it before the appraisal is ordered, and then are able to order an appraisal within and receive it back within 24 hours. That's my understanding of the process. I'm sure I've butchered it a million ways from Sunday here, but that is my understanding of it. And I can see how it could happen on some levels. I think, Brian in his video talked about 80 or 90% of conventional loans this likely could work for. You clearly have to have a cadre of appraisers ready to take in one of these hybrid assignments along with the inspection already completed, and jump on the report completion within a day. So what do you think, Jeff? Did you see the video? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I did see the video as well, and I think you've done a good job of summarizing it. Maybe there's a little bit of strategic butchering of what the offering is, just to see if Brian may want to come on and
there you go.
Talk a little bit more about it. You described it as a little bit of a lightning rod. I've seen through some of the comments and posts, not just comments on this video post, but previous posts that he's made, a lot of skepticism from certain practicing appraisers, which I understand where that comes from. Before this video dropped today, there wasn't the clarity around, is this conventional appraisals that they're guaranteeing in 24 hours, or what is it specifically that's being offered? And so, pretty clearly they laid out, this is for a hybrid where somebody, not the appraiser, does the inspection before the appraisal's ordered. One of the problems in the past has been, when a hybrid appraisal is ordered, they kind of do both things at once, but the appraiser can't do anything until the inspection is completed, the data is transmitted, and then they have that to be able to start the process. And so, they're envisioning ordering that inspection piece well before the appraisal is needed, which makes sense. So I'm watching with a lot of interest as to what the adoption is. I think, one of the things he talks about in the video is, we're going to order it at this stage of the process. When they're ready to move forward with a potential hybrid appraisal, we'll get it to the appraiser. The appraiser will turn it around in 24 hours. There's not any real detail around how that's going to happen. Do they have a panel of people that have committed to that? I just don't know. There's some questions, around that. Whether it's this or something different, I mentioned this recently in a different setting, but there are a few things that people always want. Technology has facilitated this. Jeff Bezos has talked about sitting back and thinking, what's a client or what's a potential customer always going to want? Well, to hear him describe it, I can never envision a scenario where somebody's going to want something slower, or that costs more money, or that is less convenient to get. And so I think in the valuation services space, there's always going to be demand for, kind of that same thing. If we can get a better quality, faster experience, better report, there's always going to be demand for that. And whether this, scratches that market itch or not, kind of remains to be seen. But interesting to see what they're looking to offer at this point. Love to chat more with Brian about it.
Yeah, Jeff, any that have heard me say this have heard me say it for 8 years. It's pretty central to what we're trying to do in private enterprise with Security. And in fact, this was 5 years ago or more, almost 6 now, than when we launched, that our phone number is 877-24-hour 1004. It's been sort of a central North Star for us. I think it's possible. I think it's possible in the conventional appraisal process where the appraiser is going out and inspecting. And I like to think of what we're trying to be. If a typical appraisal is 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on how someone works total to finish a job, well, that is well within 24 hours. And what ends up happening on every appraisal is an enormous amount of idle time after it's ordered. And so really all that you and I are trying to be with our company is an eliminator of idle time, and really an expert in eliminating idle time, not skipping any steps at all. In that sense, maybe that breaks it down. Maybe it adds to the lightning to the rod here, but I think in simplistic terms, that is how this sort of thing could be accomplished. It of course can't be accomplished with an inferior product. There's too much risk. There's just too much at stake, clearly. So I'm interested in Reggora's take on that. I think I encourage the conversations and the attempts at innovation, and the industry needs it. And if appraisers generally can bring these types of solutions to the market, I think we have staying power, much more so than if we stay static.
I think that's a really good point, because if there's not enough appraiser capacity, or if appraisers aren't able to adapt to the service level that users want, there is the option to go a different route, and that hasn't happened to this point. I hope it doesn't ever happen, but I think you make a really good point. If we can provide a better level of service, and that's speed, that's quality, that's all of the above. Than what has historically been able to happen with limited technology, solutions and opportunities. I think we do have a lot of staying power. I think we do control our own destiny, to a large extent, but have to be willing to adapt, with the times. And so excited to see where it goes. And there are definitely, very strong opinions that, hey, this can't be done. It shouldn't be done. I understand where those come from as well. But, with you, I think I'm more inspired by a large challenge than, how can I make this appraisal, 5% faster, to do over time or something. That just doesn't really, move the needle for people as much as, aiming for a much more ambitious target.
Principally, I think, reasonable concerns here that a lot of people have are that there's going to be a significant drop in quality. We can't have that, right? That does not benefit the appraisal profession. And two is that it's just threatening to someone that won't or can't deliver that quickly. And I think there's plenty of room for appraisers that are serving a different type of client and all that sort of stuff. And, this is just helping appraisers sort of meet a certain segment of clients' needs that kind of wants to go elsewhere because they're always going to be searching for improvement in speed and accessibility. So, I think like we talked about with Opendoor, the mission generally is home accessibility, right? And safety and soundness of the lending process. So more accessibility to the lending world so that we can increase home ownership, but keep lending decisions and collateral safe and sound.
Exactly. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's exactly what I was thinking too, is that the Opendoor analogy or connection to, how can we provide a better experience and a better opportunity to what has traditionally been done? And will they ultimately be successful? I don't know. It's interesting to follow. Will Reggora ultimately be successful? I don't know. It's interesting to follow, but I can certainly respect somebody who's trying to make a significant improvement in what traditionally has been done the same way for a very long time.
You bet. By the way, Opendoor peaked at $10.52. At $7.38. So as memes do, they peak and come down a little bit. I'd like to see it come down a little more. So I'll be watching that at least momentarily. So we'll be.
You've got some dollars in hand if you're ready to pounce.
I don't know. I'm not saying I do, but I'm not saying I don't. So we're sitting here today with rates at about 6.25. I looked as we were coming on to the podcast here. There is a 97% chance, according to a number of prognosticators, that Powell and the Fed at the end of October is going to lower rates. When we get to that level, they darn sure better do it, because I'm not going to like the reaction in mortgage rates if they don't. But we have that coming, I think. And I think sort of a headline getter was Trump kind of urging Fannie and Freddie to push builders to build more. And I thought that was really interesting. We wanted to discuss it a little bit on the episode here. And I don't know, it got me thinking, like, what all can Fannie and Freddie do to really push builders to build? I'm not really sure. So what do you think about this headline?
Yeah, it really stood out to me when I saw it because I understand the desire, to move real estate transactions generally. The timing's interesting to me as well, Mark, because we're also seeing headlines, maybe not across the country uniformly, but we're definitely seeing headlines of increasing inventory in the first place. We've talked in multiple episodes of some of the strategies that builders are employing to move existing inventory that they have. I think it's getting harder for them to sell homes than it was, with interest rates where they've been and price levels where they've been. And so, for the administration to be trying to push for even more new home building, it makes me wonder exactly how that's going to play out. And I will tell you that if we get added inventory to what's already a building inventory, that could help with some housing affordability issues with inventories rising. But builders aren't going to build just to take a loss on the additional building that they undertake. And so I think to the extent that Fannie and Freddie are able to offer more favorable financing or interest rates, is that a possibility? Is that something they can do? I'm not sure to what extent that could be. I think you were seeing some research around maybe a one-time close that could help clear out some of the pipeline of loans in with money tied up. Might be one of the kind of procedural things that could be done to help facilitate new borrowing, just availability. But it's kind of interesting to see where and how they're pushing on that, especially given the market dynamics that we're observing right now.
Yeah, boy, and I think we've talked about builder sales making up some 40% of the market over the last little bit, and it's traditionally 14 or 16%. So, a little of my instinctual reaction, well, damn, what do you want them to do? They've been building like crazy for 2 or 3 years. They are slowing down in the moment for sure, and I mean, it's interest rate related, right? I think generally speaking. And that's largely why Trump has been begging and threatening any and all that he can to try and get rates to lower sooner than they have now, but assuredly to get wherever they need to get to move the market in 2026. And, you and I are living that. I won't be able to pronounce his name. Logan from NAR, Matashami, I think is maybe it. I shouldn't have started that without knowing how to pronounce it, but economist is saying, hey, I mean, you can do all this other stuff, but rates is really the formula. Get rates lower and things are going to move. I mean, that's just where we are, and rates have not been in a place to move anything. I day after day, I come across examples of people sitting on the fence, and why not? And it's all tied to rates. Like when Powell is forecasting that you're gonna cut rates to 100% probability at the end of October, and you're going to do it one more time in November or December. Boy, the worst thing he can come out and do is say we're also going to do it sometime first quarter of 2026, because then what are people going to do? They're going to wait for all of that to happen. And so, these little trickles of rate cuts doesn't help anybody, at least doesn't help the market to move. And what we need is some level of certainty. So some things that Grok has suggested Fannie and Freddie could do. You mentioned one of these, Jeff. They could accelerate purchase of construction to permanent loans. I think others, like the USDA has kind of a one-time close initiative on construction to permanent loans and lending. That is one option. Track and disclose builder incentives and create rewards for quote unquote right behaviors. I think right behaviors in this case would be building more homes. And maybe have some disincentives for those that can't. Expand credit innovation, broaden borrower access. That thing worries me a little bit. I saw some comments in the article that I was reading talking about the return of ninja loans and in the 80s and all sorts of things, which you can't get overzealous in wanting to increase home ownership without the safety and soundness. A lot of regulatory burden. I think it's from zoning, from green code, on and on. There is red tape everywhere, especially building inside major cities. I think this is an enormous bottleneck for building, and it's why we have so much building going on in the suburbs. So those are some things that I saw there, Jeff. One last topic. I know I've got a mouthful here on it, but it was just a commenter talking about the uncertainty that we live in right now. If you want to fix this as a home builder, we could use some semblance of predictability, some ability to look ahead and know what is going to happen with rates, tariffs, regulations, et cetera. And it was just making the point that Trump hasn't helped that at all. In fact, he's created more uncertainty in the marketplace, and that uncertainty is what everybody is fence sitting for in my mind.
Boy, I think you're exactly right. And yeah, a couple of anecdotes even come to mind, around that. So I've gotten to know somebody, through the Appraisal Foundation that works, for the IRS, although she's pretty funny. She kind of says that hesitantly, doesn't necessarily, know what kind of response, she'll get, but does work in and around the personal property valuation. And when people are making donations or claiming write-offs, based on personal property donations, she's one that will kind of oversee that. Well, I was talking with her at lunch today, and it's just so interesting to get just the lived experience of this uncertainty. I mean, you've described it kind of at the macro level, through this commenter, which we certainly, see and can sympathize with, but within the administration, within the various divisions of the government, there's a lot of this uncertainty that's taking place. And, so October 15th, I think, was the extension filing deadline, and the government shut down. And, the IRS agents, or at least in her department, are on furlough and, can't do anything in the moment, can't answer questions. Just interesting to see the level of uncertainty that's taking place, at that level. I was feeling a little bit bad that we went to see some historic sites that were closed because of the government shutdown and people not, on site to open doors and unlock, monuments or museums or whatever. But like her livelihood, her job is, furloughed, and we're seeing, reports of some now being moved to layoffs, and then some that were moved to layoffs that are now being reinstated. It's just this level of uncertainty, I think, resonates in a lot of different areas and arenas, and it makes it really, really hard for anybody making business decisions to be willing to commit to anything. I mean, we'd like to grow and expand, but we aren't comfortable making massive changes in kind of outlook and policy decisions until we have a better idea of certainty around what is the interest rate environment going to look like, and lending rules and regulations and that sort of thing. And so just to hear or to see that one comment, I think really encapsulates what a lot of people are feeling right now, in real estate and well beyond that, just due to the uncertainty of the kind of this chaotic style and approach that the Trump administration has. And it was that way in Trump 1.0. It's certainly living up to be that and more in 2.0 as well.
You bet. Yeah, it is. And I think Trump is setting up for a more certain 2026. Those aren't his exact words, but I think that's essentially what he's saying. I wish we'd just make rates 5% and say they're going to be there for the next 15 years. I think that would be a real boon. And provide the level of certainty that we need out there from mortgage transaction, home ownership, and all. I don't think we're going to get that exactly, but I think the plan is to have more certainty come 2026. So we'll see if we get there.
I would welcome that. I will just do one other anecdote comes to mind, Mark, on the uncertainty topic. Is I'm aware of a very small scale, but a commercial transaction where, because there are these known or at least highly anticipated additional interest rate cuts, I've seen people saying, well, yeah, I could pull the trigger and close on something now, but why not wait until the end of the year or into next year, because I'm going to get a better, commercial lending rate than what I would have otherwise. It's just interesting to talk to players in the space out there. They're doing exactly what you talked about a minute ago, of why move now if they're signaling that the terms are going to be more favorable down the road. And so I think it's having, though in the long term we want shorter interest or lower interest rates, dragging out getting them here, I think kind of forestalls the transactions that might otherwise happen sooner. And so it in the short term, it's a little bit counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, we've got one more topic on the docket here. It may not be over in 2 minutes, as often this topic can carry on with us, and it is just kind of checking in on artificial intelligence news in and around developments from kind of a macro level, how those things are impacting us in the real estate world, specifically appraisal. You were talking a little about friend of the pod, Telford's speech, I think, an interview that he just gave, talking about just needing to be in, around, and deep into this to kind of immerse ourselves so that we know and are part of wherever this thing is going and don't get consumed by it entirely. There's just a lot going on. I've spent a lot of time talking about a little bit of skepticism on how this next word guessing phenomenon is going to take all the leaps that it needs to take to be as impactful as it can be, and as people say it will be, like to a point where it builds fear that professions are going away, or it will make large decisions for us that we can't get out of, and all these sorts of things. I will say, on a small note, Grok has taught me how to install, just by pushing this button. I can now speak to the voice activation with Grok and have conversation at the push of an external button on my phone, and that's been really, really nice. Kind of like you would use Siri, but Siri will go to ChatGPT when it doesn't know the answer. It's a little clunky, multi-step, and I'm not sure I'm getting the full version of ChatGPT. This has been really good. So it's helping me, facilitating that voice communication. But we've got a couple of different pieces of news here that the concept of world models, which are something, Jeff, I've not heard of until the last 10 days or so. Usually that means they've been in the works for 15 years when I finally hear it. I think that's probably true on some level. But world models are facilitating AI to create, assess, and analyze worlds around it. And so worlds could be a city, a landscape, maybe even like the internet and all the information that it consumes. I think that's probably one example of a world, and they're just now trying to apply that to a lot of other worlds. So Tesla's full self-driving, where they are just documenting video footage of the world through roads and having it. I think that's a real good example of a world model, where the system can then next word guess, but it's next pixel guess and next direction guess, or next medicine guess, next hypothesis guess, I guess, in the world of scientific experiment, thinking through these things. And so you might be able to do a better job now that I've fumbled through trying to explain this, but this seems to me to get much more at I guess, is building the bridge from where we are now to some sort of super intelligence or general intelligence.
Well, I think you've summarized that part well, Mark, in that for me, it does bridge a little bit of the gap of this large language model approach to artificial intelligence. And, part of what we had looked up and researched leading into this was, and I don't know if I'm envisioning this correctly, but was, within the construct of the neural nets, creating a model of what the physical world is around us for an intelligent system to understand. One of the things I read was that they're finding early on that it can lead to 10 to 100x improvement in calculation efficiency. It's a little bit like you and I have a model of the world. I mean, I'm in a hotel room right now. I know what it would look like if I walk, I go down the elevator, I go out onto the street, I get into a car, I go to a restaurant, or do whatever it is, that you might do in the physical world. And so I think the way I'm conceptualizing it, with the short amount of time we've had to try to digest, what this is giving that level of context to an artificial intelligence system, that then when you're going to it as a user and asking it questions, it already has this kind of predefined model of what the world is around it. And I think they may be tailored to specific applications, the driving world, like the street world, for autonomous driving, robo-taxis, that kind of application. Robots, in a factory, their world might be the factory floor. So I think it gives you the ability to train and hone in on specific use cases. But conversely, I think it also may be what bridges the gap to a more artificial general intelligence by having this programmed into the neural net model of what the world is around it to be able to answer or function in a more generalized capacity. It's just really fascinating. Admittedly, you and I are only scratching the surface of what this really means and how it really may apply, but we've known we're early days of artificial intelligence. I think we're seeing that with, oh, hey, there's an entirely different construct for how artificial intelligence may apply, may be programmed at a very base level. But at the same time, it's really fascinating to see. It'll be fun to dive deeper and learn more about how this world model construct is. Is it just a stepping stone to a better way for AI to ingest and then output information that that we have and kind of take for granted? I don't know, but it's really an interesting development, I think.
Yeah, there's I think a lot of excitement around those that are on the front lines of developing artificial intelligence, building these enormous data centers with all of these GPUs from NVIDIA and the like, and saying, here's the next step. And it was notable that a company like XAI is hiring people away from NVIDIA, to go build these things, because I think there's a lot of excitement about this next level of thing. And Jeff, I think it was the first podcast in which we had friend of the pod Jim Amron on, where I was talking about this observation of how we learn to build planes is like watching birds, and how strikingly similar the plane is. I mean, we weren't very imaginative. I mean, we just used what worked when we saw the birds, and maybe it couldn't work any other way. But in the same way, neural nets and trying to piece all these neurons and pathways together, like the systems the LLMs do with words and context, to get to being a good next word guesser. It feels like these world models are folks learning how to help the systems think, and building a foundation for them to think in a useful way in the world, not just next word guessing, but going beyond that one way or another. And so it seems like a lot of the push is in figuring out how to teach it better, and how to build it, set it up for success in giving the answers that we're growing accustomed to, but in a very narrow feedback loop, within these chatbots.
Yeah, I think that's a good description of what we're seeing in this current iteration of it, Mark. And I mean, it just keeps coming back to me that, from the end user's perspective, from our perspective, artificial intelligence is the new way of interacting with compute and computing capabilities, but from the programming and from the software's perspective, there are new ways of having it run and operate in the background as well. And they continue to evolve, as well. I think you're exactly right that, as humans, we see what works and then we try to pattern something after. These neural nets aren't something new, but it's really designed to follow the brain's neurological structure of these, connection points with, synapses throughout the entire brain. And so I think, with this world's model approach, it's kind of a similar thing of, well, let's teach it what a world, or whatever the world we want to define it as, looks like, operates, and functions. And then use that as the baseline or the basis from which we then ask questions or train it to do things, in the physical world or whatever. It's really fun to be living this. It's hard to keep up. I mean, at the time of the internet or mobile technology was evolving, I think people underestimated what it can do, and others overestimated or envisioned it doing something different than it ended up doing. I think artificial intelligence will end up playing out the same way in many of those ways as well. But our quest is to understand it as well as we can, and then try to share it with the audience, with each other, and be ahead of the curve to the extent that we can with where things are going.
Yeah, you bet. And I think in other interesting news in and around this is kind of watching like XAI's very real initiative, despite the joke. They've launched this company, Macro Hard, which is kind of the opposite of Microsoft, but the intention is to build an entire Microsoft Office and maybe cloud management and all that is set up to be built and run by AI agents. And I don't know, it occurs to me, Jeff, that all of these things and all of these major innovations are, of course, being done by people that have spent the hundreds of billions and are deep on the forefront of what's going on here. Much less so in folks like you and I's hands. This is pretty big tech that's got a pretty. It's a game of kings, I guess, is what I hear said, and there's a pretty big barrier to entry, but really fun to kind of see on the outside and follow along what people are finding interesting and what threads they're pulling at, which you would assume are based on kind of fun discoveries that they're seeing as these things are being launched and how to overcome limitations.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I just listened to an article recently that was comparing, and this has been done a lot, right? But the current AI move with the internet, coming of age of the internet and laying fiber optic cable everywhere. And one of the points they made was that not every company that was investing in, stretching fiber optic cables ultimately ended up even being successful or surviving that. They put a lot of cost or they bore a lot of the expense in putting in the infrastructure that ultimately was a benefit to end users, but not always to all of those companies. These AI companies are pouring billions and billions of dollars into this with the expectation that they'll all be around to profit and benefit from it. And they may. I mean, I don't know, but I do think that, ultimately at some level, it will lead to positive externalities or positive benefits for end users, even if some of these companies that are making these massive investments, don't ultimately end up being the ones that survive or win. There were a whole lot of internet companies that are no longer, names that exist, or merged with others or whatever. But I suspect we may see something similar play out. But it really does feel like an AI arms race with all of the investment that's taking place, to be sure.
Well, in the last bit of news, which I thought was just exciting and sort of predicted that AI is going to help in this way, is a really interesting cancer hypothesis breakthrough using AI. I think it was Google DeepMind and Yale, 27 billion parameters or something entered in, and the story ultimately is that the AI system suggested a hypothesis to make a certain type of cancer visible to the immune system. This particular cancer stays invisible to the immune system for a very long time and causes it to grow and not be attacked by the immune system because the immune system can't see it. And so it was some suggestion of an existing drug along with a low dose of interferon, which is like a protein communicator or something. But the combination of those two would make the cancer visible to the immune system. And that hypothesis ended up being tested in a lab and is proving to have some 50% increase in visibility of the antigen, which is what cancer kind of gives off to the immune system. And so, boy, have you been hearing a lot of that. Whenever I hear people trying to provide examples of how this might work, sort of goes over my head. I think having a living, breathing example paints a little clearer picture of how this thing can happen. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought it was pretty exciting and pretty cool. And I've thought this over the last several years that even those that are close to end of life or end of life, man, so close to such likely life extending discoveries, and certainly a motivation for me to keep healthy and stay in some state that I'd like to extend life in when they make these discoveries. But amazing stuff around the corner.
Yeah, I'm hoping you don't miss the mark too. But it really is fascinating to see. And I do think that is one of the areas where we will see a lot of just benefits to humanity in the advancement of, medicine, but medicine very broadly speaking. Like how do our bodies work? How do our individual physiologies work? And that's one of the things that I think that this enhanced ability to compute just such massive amounts of data is, we can find general solutions, but I think we'll also be able to tailor them to individuals, like specific, body compositions or just the way that they work. And such a fascinating time. I'm with you on that. I think there are a lot of really cool discoveries, to be forthcoming, that we might have gotten to eventually, but with the enhanced ability of AI to just crunch massive amounts of data, it's fun to see. I mean, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what additional medical breakthroughs come out as a result. But this was a really fun, kind of early indicator of the type of solutions that that could be forthcoming, and hope to see many more. And just as you articulated, I think there's a lot of benefit for those that are around to to be able to enjoy it going forward. So I'm definitely looking forward to it, man.
You bet. You bet. Well, Jeff, that'll wrap it up for this episode. Hopefully by the time we record next week, we will be out of this little mini mortgage transaction depression that we seem to be in as everybody's waiting for the next rate cuts. Thank you, Jerome Powell. Better times ahead, huh?
Well, I'm perpetually optimistic for that. I'm hoping that that's the way it plays out. But we commented on this previously. I think that with the expectation of cut in rates, we are going to see some tailwinds. I think it's going to be a little bumpy through the end of the year as to how we get there, but we'll be back and reporting on it next week. So buckle up.
Better times ahead. Safe travels.
Amen to that. Thanks, Mark.